Hello everyone, today's poem is Gui Feng, Fei Feng, a Gui Wind from the Book of Songs. Someone will pronounce this wind as Kuai Feng. It's okay. It's because of the long Chinese history and the huge geographic area. So the pronunciation changed by many reasons through the history. So you would, if you read a lot or if you dig into the characters, you will find a lot of the pronunciation just for one character. It's because of so many things. Okay, today it's not the focal point for the pronunciation. Let's call it Gui Feng. So Gui Feng is the wind, the poem, the songs from the Gui State. Just look at the map. The famous Zheng River and Wei River was in this state. So in Chinese, it's so called as Zheng Wei 之地, which means this place, this state was famous for the two rivers in it, the Zheng River and the Wei River. So far, if you have ever impression of the Zheng Wind, the poems in the Zheng Wind, it is something similar in this map. This is the very location of the Zheng State. So why? Because the Gui State is the first state destroyed in the spring and autumn period. So basically in the West Zhou dynasty, before the spring and autumn period, all the state was well managed by the King of Zhou. But at the end of the West Zhou dynasty, the Zhou king was killed by the savage tribe, by the nomad tribe from the west, and thus there is nobody take care of the state affairs across the whole China. And also a lot of the states surrounded the former capital area, which was the Xi'an city today. They fled to the east China, and Zheng State was one of them. Their state was once within very closely to the Xi'an city, and in the time of the nomad invasion, they fled to the east, and the Zheng State destroyed Gui State and occupied the land and the people of this state. So from this history fact, we know very clearly that the poems in the Gui Wind was all written roughly before 770 BC, which is the time when the West Zhou dynasty entered to the spring and autumn period. So in general speaking, the Gui State is of very little history record till today. It's a very fertile and wealthy land. The people enjoying all kinds of entertainment. Anyhow, the state lord doesn't fulfill his duty as the state lord. So that's one of the key reasons why the Gui State was chosen by the Zheng State as a target to destroy, and the land, the wealth, was the target by the Zheng State as well. And in the famous Shi Jing review by the Prince of Wu, the Gui Wind was there is no comment at all for the Gui Wind because very likely because the Gui Wind is tiny, is of very little things and feelings. So the original word is like 自贵以下无鸡焉. The character 鸡 means irony in modern Chinese, but in the time of Shi Jing, it means nothing else, no comments. But it still reflects the attitude of the Prince Wu that he don't look on the poems in the Gui Wind. But anyhow, even it has only 4 poems in the Gui Wind only have 4 poems, but still has something. The first 2 is a very classical tradition poems for their ancestors, while the 3rd and 4th is quite different and has its specialty, is sort of unique in the poems of Shi Jing as well. The 3rd poem, 西有长处, reflected a deep sadness by the contrast with the little boy and the feelings of the poet. The little boy is very happy. He just enjoying the happy moment, the prosperous fruit trees was growing. It's just like the little kids, like the children. But the poet has foreseen the very sad result. There would be no home anymore. There would be no ancestors' temples anymore, which means there would be no state in the very near future. So that's a very, very huge contrast and sadness by contrasting the feelings of the poet with the happy little boy. So a lot of people think that the 3rd poem, 西有长处, was written at the very end of the Gui State, which is basically at the end of the East Zhou dynasty. So with that in mind, the 4th poem normally was a poem written after the 3rd poem, and with that background, the Gui State was about to be destroyed. The King of Zhou might be slaughtered, killed by the nomad invasion. With that in mind, the 4th poem, 北风, shows its real face. It's not like the general explanation that this poem was about the homesick. Someone, a Zhou people, happily stayed in the Gui State or lived in the Gui State, and he heard some bad news in the Zhou capital, the Xi'an city today, and he was worried. He was thinking about his hometown, and someone said this is an indirect way of expressing his worriness that the political affairs in the state is not good, so he was so worried. And the term 周道, the road of the Zhou, was interpreted as the right way of the political affairs, the right rulings, good governance. Well, today, let's see what I find out for this poem. Now let's look at the first paragraph. 北风发习，匪车劫袭. It's not because of the wind starts to blow. It's not because of the chariots rushing. 故瞻周道，中心达西. I'm looking back and forth, and I'm looking into the distance on the road of the Zhou, and my heart was hurt so much, was hurting so much. I was so worried. So here is something we need to pinpoint, to smell out. The poet was so worried, and he was looking back and forth, looking to the distance on the road of Zhou. So in the general explanation, the road of Zhou was interpreted as the derived meaning, the right way, the good governance. And the meaning, road of Zhou, means the main road built by the Zhou dynasty. So it's just like the highways to connect the key strategic states with the capital. So the Chinese is so good at construction and road building, at least since the Zhou dynasty. So whenever we saw the term Zhou Dao, it referring to the main road, like the highways today, connects all the strategic states to the Zhou capital, which is Xi'an today. And here explain two things. The Gui State was a very strategic state located on the road of Zhou, and even today, the city Zheng Zhou was the most heavy traffic state in all China. So in this poem, the Gui State has the convenience to know the latest news happened in the Zhou capital, and for sure there's something really, really bad happened there. And the poet was so worried, and he was so sad about that. The term 中心 in modern Chinese will write as 心中, which means inside my heart. So the Chinese think the feelings, the emotions is from the heart. So whenever we express the sadness, the happiness, the true sadness, the true happiness is always inside or from the heart. And the first pair of sentences, not because of the wind blows, which actually gave us a contract that the situation, the environment is so peaceful. There is no wind, there is no rush traffic. Everything looks normal. It's a very fertile land in this Gui State. Okay, let's go to the second paragraph. Basically, it's repeating the first paragraph. 北风飘兮，匪车飙兮. It's not because of the wind blow heavily. It's not because of the chariot rushing quickly. But I just look back and forth and look into the distance on the road of Zhou, and from my deep heart, I expressed my condolence. So in the second paragraph, it's double confirmed something really bad happened in the Zhou capital, and someone died, because 掉 is always a term to express the sentence, the words, and the actions, to express the condolence to a dead people. So someone in the capital of the Zhou dynasty died. And this double confirmed first paragraph. What we have analysis, the King of Zhou was slaughtered by the nomad tribe. Now the third paragraph, it has a little bit change from the first and second paragraph. It doesn't repeating the first and second paragraph as a normal poems in the Book of Songs. So there is some abnormal things in this poem, right? And the third poem strongly reinforced what I've analyzed, that the King of Zhou was killed. Let's see. 谁能烹于盖之辅赠 or 盖之辅秦? It has several pronunciations. I think either should be okay with this poem. So the meaning is, who can offer the fish as a sacrifice? So it means they offer the sacrifice to God or to their ancestors. It's a big ceremony for the Zhou people. 盖之辅赠, so to wash the bronze vessels which was used by the big ceremony. So the bronze vessel is 釜, so that's the bowl to boil the meat, fish, all kinds of food. 赠 is also a kind of bronze vessels to steam the meat, food, and to make all those food as a sacrifice. So the first pair of sentence basically means, who would offer the food as a sacrifice? I could be a helping hand to wash those bronze vessels used for this huge grand ceremony. So the grand ceremony is not just offering the food, the meat, the fish. It's a very complicated and a long process, needs all kinds of hands and people to make it. So the poet expressed his willingness. He wants to help something, to help on the sacrifice, to build the foundation of the Zhou dynasty, because in the man side of the Zhou people, the sacrifice, the huge ceremony, and the war is the two cornerstone to make a country, to make a dynasty. So the first paragraph today is just like a nonsense to a modern people, to a modern Chinese, but in that time it means very clearly, who can build our cornerstone again? And I would be a helping hand. The poet himself wants to be a helping hand. So this indirectly tells us that the cornerstone was sabotaged, right? And some of the foundations of the Zhou dynasty was destroyed. The king was slaughtered, right? Okay, the last pair of sentences. 谁将西归怀之好音? Who will go back to the West? So it's also pointing out very clearly something in the capital of the Zhou dynasty, in the Xi'an city today. They need something. They need great help to restore the situation, to rebuild the Zhou dynasty. But in the real fact, the Zhou dynasty had never been rebuilt again. It entered to the spring and autumn time, and then to the warrior states period, and then the Zhou dynasty collapsed and vanished forever. Okay, let's finish the last pair of sentences. Who would go back to the West? And I would have all my sons, good for him. So I will sing my best songs to him. So this expressed or indicates several things. The poet would stay here, and he treated go to the West as going back home, which implies he was a Zhou people. He shared the same blood with the royal family, with the King of Zhou. So that's why he was so hurt. He was so worried. But other people in this state, they keep their normal life. How do we know? Because there's no wind. 北风发西, there's no wind. There is no rush chariot. So everybody in this state, they lead a normal and happy life as usual. Even the King of Zhou was slaughtered. It doesn't matter because they have the same, they don't share the same family name. They have different ancestors. So that's the key question. That's the key point. And this poet, he was a Zhou people. He lived in this state and he was so worried. But he might be very old, or he is not a capable man of fighting. He's not capable of fighting. So he didn't go to the West, go to the Zhou capital to help the Zhou people because he's not capable of doing that. He just write this poem and sing his best voice to praise, to pray for those people go to the West, to the Zhou people in the West. So I think that's maybe the one of the very likely situation this poem was about. So to fully understand this poem, the situation, the feelings, two things. First is the situation around is quite peaceful and maybe happy. There's no wind, there's no rushing chariot, but the poet himself was so worried and he was so sad, and he was standing on the road of Zhou and looked back and forth and looked into the distance, and finally he expressed his all his hope is, can someone go to the West to help the Zhou king to restore the order, to rebuild the Zhou dynasty, and I will try my best to give him a helping hand. Anyhow, the poet, he cannot do anything physically. Maybe his he's so old. Maybe he's something, I don't know. All he can do is to write this poem and to sing his best songs to those who would help the Zhou dynasty, to restore the Zhou dynasty. And the second thing is, it tells very clearly the poet is a Zhou people, because he treated to go to the west as go back home, 西归. So this is a very, very key situation or key factor in this poem, and he emphasized 周道, the road of Zhou, 2 times in the first and second paragraph, and make it a very focal point in this poem. So it has, of course, has double referring. The first thing first, the road of Zhou. The second, the governance of Zhou. So, and finally, in the later generations, most of people just thought about this poem is about the governance of Zhou, and it reflected that the governance of Zhou is so bad, and this poet just sang. And in this poem is not just a simple sign of the bad governance, because in the third paragraph it's mentioned the foundation, the offering, the sacrifice. We need to it needs to restore it. So it's strongly implied the king was killed. And in the second paragraph, 忠心屌兮, the poet was expressing his condolence to the Zhou dynasty, to someone in the Zhou capital. Someone died. So that's a very, very important information we need to capture, to understand from this poem. Okay, that's for today, and that's all for Gui Feng. Even it only has 4 poems, it still has something we can learn from. Bye bye for today.